build an inclusive culture at your startup? Expand the depth and breadth of your team and become more competitive by creating a culture at your startup that is welcoming to people of all backgrounds and experiences. Learn firsthand from your startup and company leaders about the benefits and challenges associated with creating diverse organizations as they share from their own personal experiences. Gain practical insights into how you can build a truly diverse and inclusive culture at your startup. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Graham, DC Market Editor of Technically DC, Michael Atkin, President of Link Strategic Partners, Rakia Finley, Founding Partner, Copper and Vine Studio and Company, Jane Jonas, CEO of IF Studios and Gallaudet University alum, and Sammy Paul, Chief Operating Officer of Means Database. So please give them a round of applause to welcome to this panel.
Said alum, not law. What did he say? Alum, not law.
Thank you so much for having us today. Good morning again.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. So before we get started, for those of you who haven't heard of Technically DC, we're an online news organization covering the startup, tech, entrepreneurial scene here. I'm a one-man band. I cover the entire scene. Majority of my team is in Philadelphia. Specifically this month, we're talking about diversity and inclusion and also technologies of color. So I will definitely be taking a lot of notes during this panel, and I'm excited. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. What does it mean to have a diverse and inclusive culture at your organization, and why is it important to build a culture that is diverse and inclusive? Would anyone like to go ahead and start tackling that?
Go for it.
We say, so at Copper and Vine, we are an all-female team, and we are actually an all-female of color team. And we like to say that we build things for the people that, we build things for the people we are, is what we tend to say in our office. And what that means is to have an inclusive team, to make the decision to have an inclusive team, to make the decision to have inclusive processes, is a decision to say what we push out and what is product to us is a product that speaks to everyone. And the only way you can truly do that is to have a little bit of everything at the table. So it allows you, from a company perspective, to have a stronger niche, a stronger foundation, and a stronger whole to say, we know what's happening outside of us, because in this room, there's a little bit of the society that we're building or servicing or supporting. So one thing that we do differently in regards to our processes, because we still, though we are a diverse team in reality, we, in our office, we're not. And so when we do our QAs, when we build our products, we have our QA sessions, we do QA sessions very differently. We actually make QA parties, and we invite everybody to our QA parties, and we make sure that the room is as diverse as possible. And then with that, we listen, and we listen to feedback, and then we pivot. So having a diverse culture doesn't mean that you're checking boxes in your system, but it means that you're changing the entire perspective of how you do your work to make sure that you're speaking to the world that you're actually servicing, I believe.
I like that you started with a big question. I think the challenge with diversity and inclusion are they become buzzwords, and they're never defined. So I love that you're asking us to define them. So in my organization, we run a strategic communication and a community engagement firm. So we work across the country to give voice to communities and collective decision-making, as well as campaigns, et cetera. So we choose to look and feel and represent the communities that we're a part of and the communities that we're serving. That looks different to every organization, but for us, what that means is from a diversity of ages, our youngest employee is 16. We take students from the Urban Alliance every year. Our oldest employee is 92, so we think there's a great inclusiveness that comes from that. We represent in Washington, D.C., we have employees from all 8 wards of Washington, D.C. We're 50% male, 50% female. We have 68% on our firm are people of color. And for us, that's not because it's a buzzword. It's because we can't do our work authentically if we don't represent internally the work we're trying to do externally. We are better consultants if we have voices at the table than we are if we go out and try and tell other people how to do their job without ever taking the time to think about how we do ours.
Definitely. I love that.
So I think really what's the most important when we're talking about diversity is what is the purpose of diversity? You know, is it skin color? What is it? Is it more about deaf people? Is it about deaf blind people, people in wheelchairs? You know, so many times we forget about what diversity actually means, and it's important for us to think about what diversity and what that culture really looks like. And especially here in the disability community and out in the business world, what does it look like? We want to try to create what is the best practices and people to learn from us as a company that's owned by disability and what it actually truly means to gain access to a business. It's not just about color, not just about male and female. No, but we have to make sure that we include disability as well.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, to kind of say something a little bit different than what's already been said, I work at a tech nonprofit startup, means database. So trying to pull in different perspectives also into the tech space, because a lot of times STEM is kind of grouped together and then nonprofit humanities work is kind of grouped together. And we're a very young team based out of American University, so kind of just the whole mindset of us of like, oh, well, what did you study? Kind of compartmentalizing it that way, trying to bring in a bunch of different backgrounds and disciplines in just what your knowledge base is into the tech field and into the nonprofit field. Has been a huge, huge focus for us.
Definitely. Jane, I want to go back to the point you made about diversity and inclusion and how it has so many different parts to it. So thinking about diversity and inclusion, we often bucket these two words into the same as well, and they're very different. How do you defer the two, and what does that mean to you?
Okay, so when I think about diversity, it's more about pulling in people with different experiences, different walks of life. You know, skin color, gender, disability, diversity, you know, male, female. And then when we talk about inclusion, that's more about thinking about how we provide access and experiences to people. That's what we try to make sure that we include them as our customers, include them into our data, into our company, making sure that we do what's best by the community. That's what we really define what inclusion means.
Definitely. Does anybody else have anything they want to say on how to defer in diversity and inclusion in what you do in your companies outside of diversifying your workforce?
No, I think Jane said it perfectly. I've always wondered why diversity and inclusion, I just assumed that it just felt good to say as a collective and the D&I thing that people do now. So I kind of just took it as a marketing moment. But I'd like to believe that everyone does take those two pillars on, because they should be treated like two different pillars. And when you say inclusion, you're not just saying it when you're talking about the culture in your company, you're not saying it when you walk into your building, but you're saying, does our company as a whole produce a language and produce a outward culture to the clients we serve? I can always judge your true understanding of inclusion by your client list. And if your client list all looks the same, then there's not an inclusive voice in how you talk about what you do as a company, how you, and this applies to even, I think even being people of color, now being amazing startups and innovators, you know, and I speak for myself, it's do we have the language that doesn't make someone feel just because we are of one way, if they don't look like us, then they're not our client. So I think inclusion is making a very conscious decision to say how we speak, how we operate, how we show up will always have a voice and an empathy that allows us to be approachable and allows us to welcome all, right? Whether they're employees, clients, or partners, welcome all to what it is we're doing.
Right. I do actually see them as slightly different words. I think diversity, they're both very important, but you can have a diverse organization that's not inclusive. You can recruit your way to better diversity stats, and if you don't promote and encourage evolution in a professional sense of the people you're recruiting, you're not inclusive. So I give you a stat that 68% of my firm are people of color. When I look at my leadership team, it's not 68% people of color. My firm as a whole is. So we are diverse as a firm. We are working to become much more inclusive as a leadership team to make sure that the people we're recruiting into the pipeline have a way to grow within the firm and assume those leadership positions. So to me, that's a difference between diversity and inclusion.
I like that. It kind of reminded me of a comment someone said to me yesterday, which was very comedic, but it was true. It's diversity is who you invite to the dance, and inclusion is who you decide to pull on the dance floor with you to actually dance. Yep. And I was like, that's funny, but it's like it's really true, and it kind of gave me that. Okay, I'm going to ask this question about how to distinct those two. I'm going to move on to our next question. What challenges have you encountered along the way in building that culture, both externally and internally within your organizations, to be diverse and inclusive?
I don't think we have. It's been fun. If anyone is wavering on whether or not making a conscious effort as a founder and as a business owner is making a conscious decision to have an inclusive culture is going to be tough on you. It's not. I think it's a lot more fun. I think if you produce an environment and a culture that has a sense of openness, kindness, empathy amongst your team and your staff, then seeing a diverse team do that is a truly enjoyable thing. And to the point of leadership, there's still, if you look at the list of the top Fortune 500 companies that are really excelling in high growth, there's still only 33 of those companies are women. And then within that 33, it sounds like a big number, that's 6% of all those companies. So leadership is also a part of it. And what makes it not hard is having leadership that is diverse, having leadership that understands the importance and the true joy of having an inclusive culture.
Right. I think the challenge is that sometimes these can be really difficult discussions to have internally or externally, and sometimes they can make people, including leaders of companies, very uncomfortable, but you have to lean into that uncomfortableness and acknowledge what you do well and what you don't. And my experience has been that when you bring your entire team into that discussion in a safe way, we get better at it together. And then you have to make sure your recruitment pipelines are lining up with your intentionality. You have to make sure your mentorship and internship programs are reflecting that. So one of the things we're proudest of is we have a really robust associate program where we recruit people in at the high school level, at the college level, and the post-college level who want to try out a new industry, but don't have daddy's money to make that easy. So we pay all of our associates a living wage and above, whether they're in high school or above. There's a great thing to say, oh, I do internships. There's another thing to say, I do internships that allow people to actually make a living while they're learning. So some of that isn't easy, and especially in the startup world, finding the cash flow that allows you to live up to what you want to be is often really, really challenging. And sometimes it means, this may not be a popular thing to say in a business setting, but sometimes it means really taking a deep look at what the end of the day motivation is, and do we sacrifice a bit of profit to build a company that is much more long-term sustainable than showing quarter-by-quarter dividends that look great, but lead us to reinforce what makes us not great. And so having those discussions openly, I think it helps.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think a part of my challenge that I've faced with, as far as a business owner, I mean, I started my business 10 years ago, is trying to make sure that we provide a service that really, like 80 to 90% of our clients are deaf. And the reason for that is because they are able to communicate with us. If they feel comfortable. A lot of the time with hearing people, we have a struggle with that. Trying to make sure that we're trying to accommodate them as much as possible. So trying to understand that communication method is sometimes an issue, like how do we communicate on the phone, and trying to make sure that we do things and try to remove all the barriers within our company. And inside my company, I think we're pretty fine. We have some great inside culture, but outside, the external from our company perspective is a little bit of the challenge, for sure. Especially, people say, oh, it's a deaf-owned business. Oh, that's cute. But that type of attitude is really a big challenge for us, and trying to make sure that we change the world's perspective on how they think about a deaf-owned business, and trying to make sure that it shouldn't be a struggle, that we do have ways around this. So just really trying to make sure that that type of struggle, that is my struggle day to day, and trying to make sure we educate you, hearing people about the deaf businesses and what we do and how we can accommodate you.
Definitely. So speaking on those things you guys just talked about, what are some tactics or information or resources that startup founders and CEOs can use to become more diverse and inclusive? And if you don't know them, what are you doing to learn how to be more diverse and inclusive?
I think for us, we have a very young team. Our executive director is 24, and the rest of our team is in their early 20s or in their late teenage years. So one thing that we really struggled with was recruiting older talent, people who have been in the industry for a while, have way more experience, have a lot more knowledge. It's kind of hard to pitch to somebody who's been working for 10, 15, 20 years, hey, do you want to come work? And your boss is going to be 24. That's a hard pitch to make. So really trying to use our board members to our advantage and use our connections to our advantage to get people to vouch for us, because we will start taken seriously very often because of our age. But doing things like making the space inclusive first and then diversifying. Like when we started to recruit for a new CTO and getting people who had experience out in the field, we realized that, oh, maybe some of these people will have kids and will need some kind of a policy around that. So changing our employee policy to make it inclusive first in our space, and then going out and trying to diversify. So asking ourselves a lot of questions, putting ourselves in potential shoes of potential candidates, and kind of working backwards in that way to try to draw more talent in.
I would agree.
Yeah, so I think one of my preferences is to show people how we can build from the bottom up, and how we can actually develop that pipeline. Show people what we do. Going outside of the building, making sure that there's a stairway for success. So really, that's really the bottom line: is how do we build this company, and how do we think about what are the most basic things, and what are the customers' needs? Trying to make sure that we keep track of our customers, making sure that we're thinking about how to build the company in a way that is accessible for everyone. That is one thing I think about.
Yeah. I'll say for some training and metrics to consider, I think the very first thing when making a decision to start your company is also auditing yourself, right? And auditing what your philosophies are, just simply as a business owner. And if you have not taken any sense of a D&I training or workshop or just a webinar, definitely do that. Take audit, right? Definitely do an unconscious bias quiz, right? Harvard has a really great one. But figure out where you land in the place of understanding diversity, understand your bias. That's one of the biggest things. I think I see a lot of founders start companies and say, yes, we want this inclusive environment. We want this, everyone belongs here, and we want this diversity environment, but they themselves have biases that they haven't truly worked on, right? And where they might say, and I speak from experience of, I say, oh, I wanted this all-woman firm. I wanted to show that women know how to build products, and women know how to build technology, and know how to build software. And though we did that, I had to understand that came from an immediate bias, right? I think I had a deep subconscious of like, I don't want a single male client. Right? just women everywhere. And though that sounds beautiful, right? And when you go in the outside world who does not, no other company can say that all the way, you feel proud, but you have to check your bias. So, and then I found myself walking into my company and said, we're gonna hire men. I don't know when, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but we are going to do it. And then also preparing your staff and knowing that, being honest with your team and saying, I did this because I understand it was necessary, but I also understand it came from a sense of bias. And just as I am going to continue to work it out and work through it, and we actually go into corporations and teach them about unconscious bias in technology. So we had to really take ownership of our selfish and emotional bias that we were having, especially as women of color. So definitely take a moment before you really include people in your process as a startup and audit where you really are in this conversation. And then work on yourself, but then create those metrics for your employees. The same metrics you had to do to climb to a place of really understanding the power of inclusion.
Yeah, I have a question to piggyback off that, Michael. This is for you as well, because you discussed you have a diverse team, but the leadership team may need some work. You want to add men to the team potentially. What do these discussions look like when you start them? Does it mean getting your staff in a room and getting whiteboards and writing things down? Does it mean having someone else come in and help you with an initiative like this? Because this is a big, shift, and it may change your mission. It may change things overall. So how do you guys imagine starting these discussions?
Well, luckily, most of our clients are actually men. So, but we do have a very honest culture. And my very first startup, I was 19 years old and I was still in college. I made a lot of mistakes for most of my career, and I've created, launched, or built, or have 7 companies here in the city. And with that, I had to make a lot of decisions of what is my culture of the things that I produce actually need, and it was honesty. So we kind of have this like no holds bar reality. We call them tea talks, and we sit around and I say the inappropriate things They say the inappropriate things back, and part of those inappropriate things was we have to hire men. This is not an inclusive environment, and though it feels amazing, it feels safe. We don't do safe. That's not our company, right? And that's not how you scale. So we have to challenge ourselves, and everyone had their apprehensions, and a lot of them were biased, but we worked through them, and what we ended up doing is we wrote on the whiteboard all the things that matter to us in our studio. When we walk into our studio, it's why do we always show up? And it had nothing to do with race. It had nothing to do with gender, right? It was, I want to feel safe. I want to feel heard. I want to feel valued. And I want to feel like I belong here. And it's like, well, we can do that and still Michael can come in and we can still, right? Those things can still exist if we let them know. So I think we had the conversation. It was wine. There was liquor.
Wine helps.
It's a must.
Wine helps.
So for me, I'm proud of the diversity of my leadership team. It's not where the rest of the firm is, and it needs to be. So I think part of it is, again, just talking openly about this. I think so much of starting a business, and I mean this in the best possible way, you fake it until you make it, and you tell the story that you want to be. I think it's really dangerous to do that in the diversity and inclusion space. I think people who try and fake it get it wrong. So it's better just to say, here's where we're good, here's where we can be better. Where can we find partners that make us better? Inside our firm, we set aside an hour and a half every Thursday for what we call our STEM meeting, our strategic team engagement meeting, both to dig deeply into projects that the daily pace doesn't allow us to do, but also we generally will send around an article. The one last week was the really great Atlantic piece on intergenerational wealth and why wealth isn't passing equally across various races. And then we spend some time discussing that as a team. And you have to allow even those discussions to be inclusive. If I say, here's my position, there's going to be a lot of people around the table who suddenly agree with my position on this because I own the company, even though I think I'm inclusive and have diverse thought.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time thinking about how people get to share opinions. Do we write them down first? Do we go around? Do we let people follow up through email if they're not comfortable talking verbally? We've got to create a safe space for it. But by having those discussions, we learn from each other. The other thing we do is we have an annual retreat, and sometimes we do it twice a year. And a big portion of one of the days, it's called Ask the President, where you can submit anonymous questions that are asked to me that I don't see ahead of time. And they're hard, and they're deep, and they're hard-hitting questions, and they should be, because that's, again, how we grow, and you provide a safe space for that level of dialogue. I'd want to say just one other really quick thing to an earlier point. You asked what resources are out there and kind of what we can do in this space. In my world, a lot of our work involves going after RFPs and others where we're trying to partner with other people. In generally, both at city levels and federal levels and in corporate levels, people want to hire a firm that's got this all figured out. And so that defaults to giant firms that can make their numbers look really good because they hire so many people. I think there's a huge room in contracting to hold up those firms that say, we don't all have this figured out yet, but we're going to go into this together and we're going to do it better than anyone else. So leaving room for partnerships at a business level, I think, could allow the entire industry to get better at this.
Definitely. So what unexpected opportunities has building a diverse and inclusive culture created for you, your team, or your organization? Or connections you've made on the way that have showed to be meaningful?
I'll just say that I feel like I keep talking first, y'all. But I'll say the immediate benefit that I always marvel at as our company is because we are who we are and most of our clients don't have a level of diversity and inclusion, we get to initiate these very intense conversations with our clients about what diversity and inclusion looks like. Because what's interesting is on paper, it's like, oh, we hired this agency, they're gonna build this product for us, we're gonna do some cool stuff, and then we all walk in and it's like, oh, okay, oh. Right? And we keep coming. And it's a whole bunch of, women, that's like, no, I did your back end. We're about to work on your front end. Let's talk about your database structure. And that moment, you always will see that moment of that client kind of really like a rewire in their brain. And being able to be a strong leader and say, are you used to this? Have you ever had an experience like this? Have you ever had such a diverse team benefiting your agency? And so being able to have those really intense conversations, which ideally you want to believe you're making a little bit of change.
Entering super cliche territory, I think we all have to continue to remind ourselves that doing well and doing good are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can run a successful company, however you define that, and you can run a good company, however you define that. But we have to lean into the metrics that allow us to tell those stories really well. 4 or 5 years ago, we went after the Washington Business Journal Best Places to Work, and we didn't get it. And I got a really great dashboard back on what our team thought versus what we were. And so we spent 5 years trying to get that better, and this year we got listed, and we just won the National PR Week Best Places to Work. We're a finalist there. So I say that to say, again, we have to be honest when we're not getting it right, and we have to learn from it. We don't have to retrench and be like, God, I'm so good to my team, and they're getting it wrong. It's like, no, maybe I'm getting some of this wrong. We have to collectively try and figure this out and then tell those stories in an authentic way.
Definitely. So what are some of the best practices that you have learned in this process that you believe will be beneficial for others to consider? Anything that has definitely not worked when trying to build diversity and inclusion initiatives and implementing them?
Well, I'll piggyback. My answer would be what you just said. Is,
hold on.
Wait a second.
Oh, it's okay. So, no. So really, when I set up IATH, that was my. So I actually own a second business as well called Lost River Adventures Vacations. It's more of like a rental place, an adventure company in West Virginia. It's deaf owned. We have a story, and we show our story and show about what deaf people can do and what deaf owners can do. And we try to make sure that we really push that story because it's important to set up a company that really shows an authentic self, and making sure that we have our story that shows an inclusive culture and shows what our culture is like. And then also, I'm thinking about, often we think about this type of thing as very black and white, very binary. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we know that there is gray areas that we have a space that's more diverse, more inclusive, that we have different ideas, and making sure that people don't take a liberal or a conservative approach. Make sure that we consider all ideas. Make sure that this is a safe space for people to come and to express their ideas, both in business and in clients, and making sure that we can lead our business as best as possible, make sure that we set up our practices as best as possible.
Yeah. I was going to say I was going to be like hero complex. Just don't do that.
Yep.
Just when you begin the journey of saying we're going to be diverse, we're going to be inclusive, we're going to change the world, don't walk in with that bravado, because everyone in the conversation of D&I has something to learn. Even the person that made the decision to make it a part of a company has a lot to learn. So just understand that you are also the student, even if you brought the lesson.
I would say, resist tokenism at all costs. If you decide that, we don't have enough Hispanic males in our firm, and of the 100 people we have in front of us here, we have 2 Hispanic males, and neither of them are quite the right fit, but it's so important that we fill that role that we're going to hire one of them. To actually do the hard work to go out and create the recruitment pipelines, to find a pipeline of talent who don't only meet demographically what you want, but the culture that you're trying to create. And if you can't find that, which often you can't, then make the investment to try and create those pipelines, understanding that sometimes they take a very long time. We have interns who've come back for 8 years in a row, all the way through their high school experience, their college experience, they come back and they adjust their coursework to what we're gonna need when they graduate in a year and a half. And we've now made basically an 8-year commitment in getting someone ready to work in our firm, right? That takes a lot of time, but it's also not any more expensive than trying to hire a recruiter to find you the unicorn that doesn't exist. You cultivate people along the way that mutually want to work together while still holding up the diversity and inclusion as a core principle of what you're trying to do.
Definitely.
I think also being upfront and honest with people, like where you are. Like when we did hire a CTO who was in her 30s, I think that she was a little bit surprised when she first met us and came into the office. So being a little bit more upfront initially, being like, this is a very small team, like there's 10 of us, and you're gonna be joining like a very small team. She's like, I thought that there were 20 of you, because we haven't updated our website with all of our past staff members. And she's like, I thought there were way more of you than there were. So I think just being like really honest and upfront about everything that you do and how you promote yourself and being as transparent as possible will just make it better for everyone in the end.
Yeah, all of you touched a little bit on hiring, and this may be a harder question, but what tactics are you using to step out of your jobs board boxes to go and find more diverse employees? So is that using Facebook? Is that using Twitter? Is that advertising on certain types of jobs boards? What tactics are you using to hire a diverse workforce?
So we really don't get anyone off the job boards any longer because we were getting the same type of candidate, and that wasn't helpful. We do a lot of recruiting directly through schools and colleges and universities. We also have a hiring bonus worked in. So if we've already created a diverse pipeline, we want you to recruit other people in your network in. And as long as they stay at the firm for, I think it's 3 months or 6 months, you get a bonus in your paycheck for that. And we found that that brings in a much different candidate pool. We also have put out there that, we run a communications and engagement firm. I don't want all of my team to have a communications background. In fact, I want exactly the opposite of that. But no one knows that if you're just going after a communications job. So we've had to be a lot more intentional in saying, we want people with lots of backgrounds to apply for this. We can teach you communications and engagement. What we can't teach you is the life experience that comes from what you bring to us. And so we just had to get more direct about how we do that.
I'll piggyback. I don't do the job boards. One, the job boards are biased, right? Because the only person that actually submits for a job online is between the age of 28 now, and all the way up to 60. So if you're looking for that age range, right? However, that also particular person, that means that they have a Wi-Fi connection at their home. That means that they have a computer. That means that they have proficiency in systems that they could afford. So I always tell my team, I was like, if someone walks in here, or if you see a resume and it's graphically beautiful and it's PDF'd and it was sent to you, can tell it was sent from a Mac and all this, it's like, really judge your bias, right? Because you probably didn't read a word of it, but you were immediately impressed with this probably high privileged, high resourced individual. So you're probably not checking yourself on your diversity and inclusion levels. So we do very weird things. We stalk people. I am a freelance. If you are a freelancer and you're great, I will make you come to the dark side in a minute. So most of my staff members were originally freelancers. Were originally their own entrepreneurs. We go to a lot of conferences and we just listen. We love seeing people just stepping into their own light with their own talent. And it just kind of has always worked for us. And we look for people with sparks. We just look for people with sparks, and hustle tends to be, which is a biased word, but hustle. And and we lead that way. And what it allows us to do is to be a little bit more diverse, because if you go everywhere, you might see a little bit of something.
Can I add one thing to that? So there's recruitment, there's hiring, and then there's promotion. So we've talked about recruitment. I think hiring itself can be a really off-putting part of the process if we don't talk about it. So I don't believe asking people what their last salary level was is fair or appropriate, right? Because we lock people into what they made before and not what they should make in their current job. We've also made it impossible for people who've never reported a salary history to compete at the level they should. So I would prefer that we ask, what is your salary expectation or requirement? And we talk from there. Then when people are in their job, we have to not make this whole idea of promotion or compensation or moving on to a different job a scary thing. And this is something I've evolved on during my career. I used to be really offended when people left me after I deeply invested in them. Now I realize that if people stay with me forever, they're not living up to their full potential unless I'm allowing for that path to give them more and more leadership roles. So we spend a lot of time in our mid-year and annual reviews talking about compensation and how you ask for compensation. Because if you've never been taught that, and I can say, having managed probably 400 and some odd people over the last few years of my career, the number of people who come in and say, I want more money because I deserve it, my family's upset with me, I can't afford my rent.
Don't know that.
Great personal stories, I empathize, that doesn't get you a raise. Getting in and saying, here's what I'm doing, and here's what that should be worth does. But if we don't teach people that, and you don't have a family who's taught you that, right? I didn't have a family who taught me how to negotiate for raises. My mom's a high school janitor. She never got to go out and ask for a raise because if she did, she wouldn't have a job, right? So if we've never taught people that, that's on us. And when we achieve a certain level of success, it's on us to kind of teach people how to get there.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah, so for me, one of the unique things is because the deaf community is 80% unemployed. So that is quite a staggering statistic for us. So we actually have quite a lot of people asking us constantly for jobs. But we have people who don't have a whole lot of skills. But like you just mentioned, it's a lot of people do have kids, and sometimes their communication for English isn't all that great, and trying to get through the world is a little shaky. So we have to feel that we have to try to make sure we train and develop all of our employees as much as possible, make sure that we set up programs to make sure we do develop people and make sure that we can hire them appropriately, and then so we can get them on that success ladder. So for me, because I feel like I want to bring people from nothing to something. It's really important to me. I want to make sure that we set up a business that is inclusive and that the community can also learn from. And let them know that of their actual real possibilities. Because a lot of the time there aren't a lot of resources for deaf people in this community, and that's a really big issue that we face. Is that we just have so much. We have so much that it's just sometimes hard to whittle it down.
Can I ask Can I ask a follow-up to Jane?
Yeah.
Are there resources for companies that want to learn how to be better inclusive employers for the deaf community? That's a staggering statistic, 80%.
I wrote that down. Yeah. I was over here scribbling.
So we do have, there are some services that are available and how to be more inclusive, especially related to the hiring practices. I can give it more to you a little bit later, but definitely we have something that we can look into that, we can recruit higher education, government, and to make sure that higher education, government are more inclusive, making sure that we have inclusive language with our policies, and making sure that we also have like people who also have mental health needs. A lot of the time there's not enough therapists or counselors that are fluent in sign language. Now, oftentimes we don't have interpreters that are available. So there are a lot of barriers to these types of things, and also counselors as far as job counseling. So there is not a lot of going on, but there is so much potential that we can see in the job market. So I'm willing to do a lot of that type of legwork as well. And within the community, the business community.
So you'll take 40% and I'll take 40%?
Shocking number.
Before we move into audience questions, each of you can give a pointer, but what is one key takeaway that you would like for audience members to get from this conversation today?
Intentionality. This doesn't happen by accident. You have to be really intentional about wanting to do it, realizing that there's no perfect way to do it. And then you've hit on this very well. You have to acknowledge where the biases live in your company and in the system. I was talking to a group of, I won't mention the group, I was talking to a group of very senior level corporate executives from the region who tended to be of a certain gender and of a certain age. And they were so impressed that they had just come back from the Capital One headquarters and everyone was wearing jeans and hoodies, and that made them a trendy company. And I said, that's great. That's great. But if I'm wearing a hoodie and jeans, I'm trendy and I'm Silicon Valley. If I look different, I'm wearing a hoodie and jeans, suddenly no one's ever taught me how to wear a suit to work. We have to start acknowledging where these biases live and confront them head on if we're going to move people forward in not only their careers, but in the opportunities around them.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would say empathy. Right? This is part of this conversation. We skip that word because diversity inclusion allows us to bottle a lot of words together, but all of this is just leading and creating with a high sense of empathy for the people that take the time to work for you and the people that take the chance to pay for you. And leading with empathy as a business owner, it feels not the most profitable decision, but it's a decision that allows you to really wake up with a sense of pride. It allows you a sense of going to sleep with a sense of I'm making a difference. So lead with empathy.
So for me, I think the most important point to take away is to listen, not to respond, no, but to try to understand of what's going on. Thinking like, I'm ready to tell you this. No, listen first. Listen to what your employees, listen to what your customers are telling you, listen to what your your candidates are telling you, and then respond. Make sure that you listen for understanding first.
Definitely.
And I think being flexible. kind of encompassing all of these pieces. But having employees that have chronic illnesses that I don't understand, and just being understanding, flexible, asking them what works best for you, kind of giving them that autonomy over themselves and their work schedule, and how can you best perform? How can you allow people to be as successful as they can? And maybe a lot of that isn't working 9 to 5. A lot of these assumptions that we have of working a 40-hour work week, or doing this or doing that, or showing up at this time and having these certain meetings, kind of breaking that down and assessing why we have that in place in the first place. And if that doesn't work for people, then don't make it work for people.
Definitely. I would say my only piece of advice is if you're going to take somebody to the dance, make sure you're willing to also dance with them. If you're willing to be diverse, also be able to open up the discussion about inclusivity and know the differences. Give these panelists a round of applause, please. We have a couple more minutes. Does anyone in the crowd have any questions? Please.
Hi, great panel. So my question is actually about education. You see people talk about race and gender, disability, but do you all consider education part of diversity, especially seeing a lot of companies refer to a bachelor's degree, and that keeps people out who don't have a degree, have associates, or don't have additional training? What do you think around that subject?
I throw it out. I don't think it matters. I don't think it should matter. And I think you having the ability to spend $100K for 4 years of your life does not guarantee you the ability to be amazing. So we don't look at education. And if I see a resume that just has like half the page is all the education certifications, I get concerned, because I'm like, I don't think you haven't earned into your skill set yet. So I throw it out. I think it's unnecessary.
We look at it, but we look at it through the lens of not necessarily the school you went to, but what level of commitment it showed to get through the process. So if you completed high school versus not, if you completed an associate's or bachelor's degree or not, if you want to work while getting a grad degree because that's the only way you can pay for it, which was my experience. We look at all of that to try and tell a context for a person and their work ethic, not did they have the money to go to a specific school or not.
Yeah, for me, very similar. We have very similar perspectives. The amount of education system, especially within the deaf community, really, sometimes the education is not all that great. Sometimes they do have some great education, but trying to make sure that we look at the person as a whole and try to make sure we're able to relate to this person. I feel like having someone on paper is great, but really it's about connecting them at a personal level, at a face-to-face conversation, and we always do that. That's very important to me, is to make sure that we face people face-to-face, not just looking at them on paper.
Most of our team members are in high school or college, like in the midst of it. So yeah, we don't really look at that. We try to pull from all sorts of different types of colleges and different types of schools, and different high schools. I mean, it's a great way for us to find new people and to recruit new people. But yeah, we don't really require anything.
Can I also piggyback? I remember my staff told me to say one thing, and I did not do it. In regards to hiring, we do something very differently. We actually require a candidate to go have coffee or lunch with every single person on our team. And we don't actually have interviews. You just go, and the last person you talk to is me. And there's no decisions being made. Right. It's just a vibe. And what we actually realized is we don't have to say no to most people, because they never make it through all of the lunches or the coffee, because they just realize, like, this is a lot, right? And it immediately works. So they told me to say that, of finding your own, especially as a small startup, find the thing that actually works for you that aligns with the thought processes and philosophies. We're ideation firms. We talk to each other all day. So if you can't do that, then you wouldn't work for us. So, and it removes the bias, right? It gets to the heart of what you are. So they told me to say that, and I didn't. So sorry.
Yeah, please.
So this was a great panel, by the way. My name is Kristen, and my question is kind of like just to point on 2 challenges that I've had as an employee. The first one is pivoting. Like, I'm an accountant, and on my creative side, I love marketing, but trying to pivot within my company was really hard. And then trying to pivot once I left my company into marketing was also really challenging. And the second thing is kind of having visible other interests has also kind of been really challenging to get, like, well, what are you doing? Well, why are you doing that? Well, are you starting a company? Like, it's I'm like, I'm qualified, but you're asking me about all these other things because I have other interests that you can see and research and find. So can you
Right.
talk to me a little bit about those two things?
So on the first one, running a marketing and communications and engagement firm, make the case for me on how all of that background allows you to be better in this field, so market yourself. I think resumes or cover letters where we have to try and figure out the pivot never works as well as when you can just explain it to us. I did this, and that's why I'm gonna be great at this. In terms of outside interest, I know a lot of businesses and CEOs have very different opinions on this. Ours has evolved as well. I used to think when I started a company that it would mean they wouldn't be fully committed to the thing we were building together. I've evolved to, I want well-rounded people. I want them to be entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurial doesn't mean everyone's gonna go start their own business. It means we have to let people be entrepreneurial within what we're building together. I don't want to embarrass Yamna here, but Yamna from my team is on our creative team. She's our designer, she's a translator, she's a photographer, and on the nights and weekends, she's an amazing wedding photographer and engagement photos and all that. It's called Chilla Design. You should hire her outside of anything we do. That makes her better at what we do and gives her the entrepreneurial spirit that would be ashamed to say, don't do that because our work is more important. Number one, it's not, and number two, we wouldn't be able to recruit someone like that if we made it not something we could promote. So if you can just make sure the employer knows, for the time you need me, I am all yours. And outside of that, you want me to be a well-rounded professional, that makes us both better.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that was helpful.
That's great. Yeah. Do we have any more questions?
So I represent the disability community, and I'm creating a health tech platform regarding that community. And I constantly push myself as someone who has a disability, creating something for the disability community. So how important is it for you to have buy-in in the community to be the one pushing for these inclusive type of initiatives in a company? Because I feel like a lot of times when you don't have buy-in or you're not a representative of that community, people feel very insulted that you're pushing for an initiative. So have you guys had experience with doing this, and how do you navigate around that issue?
Right? So I've had a lot of experience with that, absolutely. Organizations, especially deaf organizations, people, think that they need to understand the deaf community. Maybe they're not sure how to interact. It's like, oh, hello, we're over here. There are a lot of companies that don't understand the deaf community, and sometimes it can get very agitating, and people just want to automatically just try to win a contract and what's going on, and without actually knowing what the deaf community is like. And it's like, no, who are you? Where are you from? Why are you doing this? What's the point? That's a big perspective from our community, especially with deaf people. It really burns them up. And they're like, oh, yeah, look, I love deaf people. Look how many people I have in the community. Oh, we're going to offer ASL classes. Who benefits from that? It's hearing people that benefit. Like I said, we need to make sure that we contribute to the economy as well, and it's going towards other people. So many deaf people are poor, and they're in poverty. We really get frustrated with that when hearing people do take advantage of the community. We want to be cool, we want to be hip, we want to have a deaf person, but they're not willing to invest, and you don't empower the deaf people. So that is one of the biggest issues that we face, and that's something we really need to do. And I feel like a lot of hearing companies do need to back off. They need to just really make sure that they're authentic for themselves. And that's what we try to do at our company. We try to understand, they want to help the deaf community and what have you. And I understand that, and we thank you for it, but let us do us as well.
Yes.
That is the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, can we get the mic over here, please?
How do you quantify or kind of increase allyship at a company? I mean, you have all these people you're bringing in, but how do you really make other people at the company feel like this is a benefit to them and really incorporate them into that discussion beyond the fact that you're hiring people that are of interest or different from them?
So you're saying you have people in the company already that, and then you want to implement more diversity in your company, so now you need them to activate as allies. You can't make anyone an ally.
No.
You can't.
I'll have to.
I wish, Lord God. But you can't. You cannot. That's a personal mission of somebody, unfortunately. Now, what you can do is you can educate, And you can take on that charge and say, like, let's look at the numbers, Scott. Like, let's do a brown bag lunch, and let's just talk about the numbers and have those numbers really correlate to your company and maybe hit home and be that level of change. You can attempt to activate an ally from a very empathetic and honest way, but unfortunately, you know.
You can also align your incentive structure to make sure it's upholding the values that are important to the firm as a whole, outside of any individual person. So in our mid-year and annual reviews, on every one, there's a self-assessment question about how have you mentored and who have you mentored and how have you been mentored. And we rate people on that, and it's part of their compensation, because mentorship inside the company is how we learn. We also outlined that attitude and approach is the #1 value. Versatility and flexibility is #2, and then technical ability is #3 in that order. If you're not getting attitude and approach right, you're probably not holding the culture of diversity and inclusion that we want, and it has a way of compensating the values we believe in and letting those folks who may not align with where we're going figure that out themselves. So I think there is a bit of a structure that you can put around it while fully agreeing that this has to be internal.
Does anyone else have anything to say on that? We're gonna stop on the questions. We have to wrap up here. We're competing with lunchtime right now. But I do want you guys to give these panelists another round of applause, please. That was amazing.